Okay, I think we are live now. We will give people a bit of time to join in from all over the country and also all over the region. For today, we have an amazing number of RSVPs. So we will see how many participants, how many audience really join in the end. But I think the number of RSVPs really attests to the importance of the issue and the importance of the future of the country. Really is a living example to show that how much that people still care about what is going on in the country. So I will give people a little bit of time to join us online. I see the number and see the number jumping up quickly. Okay, I think while people join us, we will just get started. Welcome everybody. Good morning here in North America, and good evening in Southeast Asia. My name is Yuan Sun. I'm the director of the China program and the co-director of East Asia program here at the Stimson Center. We have had a long ongoing Myanmar project since the year of 2012 that basically follows what happens inside the country, and also another area of our priority is how the external powers interact with the country and affects the country's future. And as you can imagine, a lot of work has been focused on China's relationship with Myanmar. So the military coup 2 years ago, we're marching very quickly towards a 2-year anniversary of the military coup that was launched in February of 2021. It has been 2 years, and we know that the situation in the country is not going anywhere in a positive direction. We're seeing the ongoing conflict spreading armed conflict, as well as humanitarian disasters as a result of the government and the military's policy. So, but at the same time, we're also seeing that the resistance movement is growing stronger and more united by the day. So these are not just the democratic oppositions, the NUG, but also the ethnic armed groups. We're seeing more and more groups joining hands with each other to launch their joint operations and joint resistance against the military government. After 2 years of the military coup and the armed struggle, unfortunately, a lot of observers still feel that the future of the country is still unclear. Because what we're seeing now, some would characterize as a stalemate in politics and a stalemate in the battlefield. And because the military has had such a long hold of the country's core power structure, and they also have, one would argue that more advanced weapon system, they have the resources of the nation to support their military campaigns. So some would say that the military is very difficult to defeat. And then and this year, the 2023 is going to be a particularly contentious year because according to the Constitution, that the state of emergency that the military declared 2 years ago has to come to an end. What it means is that if they want to maintain any legitimacy of what they're doing or wants to continue to do, they will need to hold an election, which arguably will not represent the majority of the population in the country, regardless of how they're trying to force people to come to the voting, the polling stations. And there are movements calling for people to resist the election, which is to be held, most speculate, this summer. And external stakeholders, of course, is extremely concerned about what is going on. We see the ASEAN coming up with a 5-point consensus not being implemented by the military government. We're seeing that Indonesia taking over the chairmanship of the ASEAN this year and has vowed to do more to promote changes and to promote improvement of the situation in the country. And of course, needless to say, the United States recently had, in the NDAA that was passed on the US Congress, has included a clause in terms of support, like real support to the resistance movement. So what is the outlook for Myanmar this year? Is there any chance for greater military victory and greater military cooperation among the resistance? That's the topic that we are trying to focus today. And to unpack these complex questions, we have invited two top experts who are currently based here in Washington, D.C. to give us their views. So to begin with, the primary speaker, Ye Myo-Heng Go-Ye, is Executive Director of the Tagang Institute of Political Studies and a Global Fellow with the Asia Program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He is also currently a visiting fellow at the U.S. Institute for Peace, where he is doing a lot of programs and projects, research on the resistance movement and what can be done better. So he is a researcher who has been primarily focused on the study of civil-military relations and transitional politics of Myanmar. And in 2011, he co-established the Yangon School of Political Science to promote public participation in the nation's political transition. In 2015, he founded the Burma Studies Center, a library and a study place in order to create intellectual space for young people who are interested in the study of Burma. So Go-Ye has an amazing history of advocacy and research on the topic of Myanmar, the development in the country. We're really lucky to have him here today. We were also very lucky to have invited him to contribute a paper, which will be posted on the Stimson website. So please stay tuned. And in that paper, he dives into the specific topic of how to promote greater military cooperation among the within the resistance movement, because some have been observed fragmentation among the PDFs or among the EAOs. So that will be the topic of his paper and his discussion today. So after Go-Ye's presentation, we're going to invite Professor Christina Fink to discuss the paper and discuss the findings from the paper. Professor Fink is one of the top Burma studies, Burma specialists here in, I would say, in North America or in the world, And she speaks fluent Burmese. She is currently teaching at Elias School joined in 2011. She is a trained cultural anthropologist who has combined teaching, research, and development work throughout her career. So without further ado, I will ask Go-Ye to start the discussion today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we will come to the Q&A after the presentation and after the discussion by Professor Fink. So with that, the floor is yours. Thank you, Go-Ye.
So thanks so much for thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the alliance politics, the military cooperations and conflict dynamics in the current armed resistance movement in Burma, especially mainly based on my article published by Stimson Center yesterday. So we all know it has been around 2 years since the coup in Burma. So during these 2 years, there has been a dramatic shift in the political and security landscape in Burma. So significantly with the rise of the People's Defense Forces (PDF) and the spread of conflict across the country. So for me, during these 2 years, the most striking fact is that the military egregious atrocity awakened people across the country to be united against the military regime. So since the onset of the coup, we can see some sorts of unity amongst the diverse groups of people. And interestingly, especially the sympathetic support and solidarity from the ethnic armed groups. So for example, when the armed resistance started in predominantly Burma areas, the long-standing ethnic armed group, what we call as EAOs, so such as Kachin Independence Army, KIA, and Karen National Unions, KNU, show their solidarity with the rising anti-winter armed struggle, so by attacking nearby military outposts. So likewise, we can see the newly founded civilian armed resistance groups have received enormous material and technical assistance from the existing armed groups. So in the early phase of the armed rebellions, several EAOs, shelters, ousted members of the parliament, activists, the young protesters, and also among them, some most received military training from EAOs, and also some were equipped by EAOs such as KIA and KNU. So since the early phase of the resistance, such development reinforce the public's expectation for a strong unity amongst the pro-democratic forces and the ethnic armed groups. So in other words, it means that there's a strong public expectation for a federal army integrating an array of ethnic armed groups opposed to the military. But in reality, I think that it was not realistic to march various armed groups into a single army within a short span of time. So we know very well that the prolonged armed conflict in Burma made a big complicated to the political and security landscape. So divided geographically, politically, historically, and ethnically, so each armed groups are diverse in terms of interests, objective, and vision. So, and also, so trust is also another issue. And based on the decade-long experience, the ethnic armed groups historically have a shallow reserve or trust towards the Burma pro-democratic forces. When we look at the history of Burma civil war has demonstrated the repeated failures or coordinations between rebel groups, and also it's also wars between the ethnic armed groups and the Burma rebels. So that's the instead of pursuing the ambitious dreams or forming a federal army. So leaders of the armed resistance movement at the time, especially from the NUGs, that they were eventually forced to find a realistic alternative. So the more realistic part is that the National Unity Government found its own truths and undertakes the military cooperation with the well-established EUs against the military. So while gradually proceeding with the goal of forming the future federal army through political negotiation and paid interest. So in this way, NUG formally launched the People's Defense Forces, what we know as PDF, with the strong support of EAOs. The NUG formally said that the PDF are a precursor of the future Federal Union Army, and I think that apparently its aim is to make the PDF its armed wing and to march it with a plethora of ethnic armed groups into the future Federal Army. So they got a lot of assistance for raising PDF army from EAO. At the same time, the NUG also engaged in negotiation with its alliance EAOs to map out the military regional commands across the country. So initially, that they conjured the 5 military regional commands across the country, but according to their agreements with EAOs, so they were reduced to 3 regional commands across the country. These 3 are the number 1 military divisional commands, which covers mostly the northern part of the country. So that's why it was called a northern regional command. And also number 2 military divisional commands, it includes the southern part of the country. So that's why it was called a southern military regional command. And also another one is the number 3 divisional commands, that what we call is the central command, which includes the areas of Naypyidaw, some areas in Mandalay, Bago, and Karenni State, and Southern Shan State. So as these regional military commands emerged out of agreements with the EAOs. That's at first I know the NUG and its alliance EAO have actively engaged in operations of these commands. So as the next steps, especially after declaring the People's Defense War in September 2021, the NUG also strengthens the cooperation with the EAOs by forming centralized military command structure. So that is jointly led by the NUG and its allies EAOs. Currently, there's two joint military commands. One is what we call is the C3C, is the Central Command and Coordination Committee, so including the NUG, KIA, Karenni National Progressive Party, KNPP, the Chin National Front, CNF, and All Burma Students Democratic Front, ABSDF. So another joint command is the Joint Command and Coordination, what we call as J2C, formed by the NUG and the KNU, which is not member of the C3C. Another thing is that to expand alliance amongst the resistance groups, the NUG also formed the Alliance Relation Committee, so which is mainly working to achieve a better cooperation with EAOs. And after forming that Alliance Relation Committee, so we can see the growing interaction between the NUG and EAOs. So mostly the non-alliance M outfits, such as the Arakan Army AA, so and M groups TNLA, and Kokent M outfit MNDA. So, and also that to institutionalize the current military cooperation, NUG is also trying to establish a war office, so whose primary responsibility is, at first I know that to strategically, logistically, and materially assist the military operation undertaken by the command structures. So in this way, during less than 2 years after the coup, the armed resistance movement has been gaining momentum, and there's been a growing military cooperation on the ground between the newly founded armed groups and the well-established the EAOs. But although military cooperation has improved on the ground, so far there's been no sufficient political arrangement that all key actors in the movement have accepted and committed. So we all know that the National Unity Consultative Council, as we call as the NUCC, so it's an intra-resistance political dialogue framework. It published a federal democratic charter, that is the political framework that vision the building of the future democratic country. But so some key stakeholders stay reluctant to demonstrate a full commitment to this binding document. So in this warring period, although they stay reluctant to demonstrate a full commitment to a binding document in the warring period, but we can see the growing resolve and determination of the anti-winter resistant groups against the military regimes, because so very recently on January 1st, 2023, so a bunch of anti-winter resistant groups, including the NUG and its allies, some neutral EAOs, so issued joint and separate statements in which we have seen the growing determinations of the anti-winter stance amongst these groups. But therefore powerful actors, despite agreed to fight against the military dictatorship, but they think that premature commitment to a post-war political arrangement without having any concrete result on the battlefield is is similar to putting the cat before the horse. So it seems that in war times that they prioritize fighting their common enemies, the military, instead or being themselves the straitjacket behind the future commitments. So a prominent analyst of the Burma insurgencies, so you all know that Mr. Martin Smith once said that in a country as ethnically diverse and politically divided as Burma, the theory for the United Front has dominated the thinking of insurgent leaders on all sides. So during over 17 years of the civil war, Burma has witnessed a shifting series of political and military alliances amongst the variety of rebel forces. So these alliances, have produced a series of political agreements and visionary joint statements that can serve as the foundation for alliance formation. but none had been able to bind together the participating groups long enough to achieve the alliance objective. So similarly, I think the quest for the overarching principle and political vision around which all resistance force could be united is really important for the advancements for the the resistance movement and future state building. But I think the overemphasis on the detailed and inclusive political agreement could possibly create a setbacks that exacerbated the current shaky relations between the groups which are still trying to overcome deep-seated mistrust. So, so for other anti-gender winters of violence, so especially the winters of violence encourage the military cooperation among the anti-winter forces on the ground. So it is still obvious that some are reluctant to demonstrate full commitment to the political dialogue platform or shared political charter. Therefore, in the current developments of the armed rebellion, the resistance movement should entertain the model of increasing strategic military cooperation on the ground and proceed gradual political negotiation for future political arrangement. So in my views, in my perspective, to sustain the military cooperation on the ground, the most important point is that all anti-winter resistance forces need to quickly find ways to build a robust military coordination system between the existing command structure. So the NUG and its alliance EU should negotiate and agree to set a comprehensive military coordination system that will primarily work together the existing C3C, J2C, and future military alliance on the strategic level. So I think that through such military cooperation and coordination, the pro-military resistance forces led by the NUG and EAOs need to build trust and move on to the next step or political negotiation. So I think only a strong military power built through military cooperation and coordinations. So I think that can assure the sustainability of the revolutionary alliance. So which will be collectively able to bring the country out of the current political, quagmire. So the international community, particularly Burma's neighboring country, should clearly note that they should be well aware that the credible path to stability and peace for future Burma can go through the resistance movement, not from the winter's move, including its planned shams election. So I think the current developments, that unity across the resistance forces is really important. So, however, I think that it's not realistic, based on the history, that it's not realistic to expect a perfect unity across the resistance forces. So, which is plagued by historical grievances, factional politics, and prolonged mistrust. So the more realistic pathway for the resistance movement is that, in my perspective, is the sequencing of the military cooperation and strategic coordination, building trust and political negotiation. So despite being not a satisfactory progress, the current movement is on the right track for advancing this sequence. That's my conclusion, is that the international community should not hesitate anymore to engage more with the resistance movement and support their efforts to building a stable and peaceful future for Burma. So I think I take a little bit long time, so thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much, Go. Yes, this is really terrific. I really like the proposal that you make, which is to make the military cooperation and the political negotiation as a sequencing exercise. So it's always a chicken or egg question of which one comes first, right? And then it's impossible to answer. So I in the discussion later, I would like to go a little bit deeper as for how that sequencing would look like. But before then, I would like to invite Professor Fink to share with us her thoughts and also her observation about what is happening with the armed resistance and whether this sequencing strategy is feasible. I think it probably is the most feasible as something that we have heard so far. But Professor, what do you think? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yun, and the Stimson Center for holding this talk as well. I would like to second many of the things that Ye Myo-hain has just said, but also provide a little bit more information and context. So I would like to talk briefly about some of the strengths of the movement, and then also some of the challenges for the movement, and end with that point about kind of sequencing or moving forward on both military and political unity in the resistance movement. So in terms of the strengths, I wanted to mention the NUG's amazing ability to fundraise for the movement. And I think that's been really significant if we compare particularly with past movements, resistance movements, if we think about the 1988 to 2010 period, for instance. And that's really put the NUG in a position where, at least to some degree, it can provide various forms of military as well as humanitarian support for both the resistance groups and for the people living in conflict areas. At the same time, the resistance movement has been much more adaptable at working with not a lot of money to create weapons that enable it to be effective. Unfortunately, those are weapons that often end up hurting people, including people in the resistance movement as they try to produce them. But landmines and other types of small bombs that they're making with the materials they have on hand, but have been very effective, particularly in urban settings and around military bases. And then the third thing is the movement into the heartland of the movement. So in the 1980s, 90s, early 2000s, the arms struggle, and before that as well, the arms struggle was primarily only in the ethnic states, and really the ethnic states were saying, we want to have sovereignty in our territories. What you do in the heartland, that's your business. We're not going to interfere there. And the Burman resistance forces who joined with them in the period between 1988 and 2010 primarily also operated in the ethnic states, at least in terms of the arms struggle, while they tried to continue with nonviolent activities in the heartland. But it's really different now. So much of what's happening in terms of the arms struggle is happening in the Burma heartland, and particularly in cities as well. And the military, the Tatmadaw, or some people in the resistance movement don't like to call it the Tatmadaw anymore, but the military has really not been able to handle that very effectively. It's just a new challenge for them, and they don't know how to manage it. And what has happened as a result is really they've treated the entire civilian population as the enemy. So basically anyone in any village or any city is a person of suspicion. And that's been really unfortunate and resulted in a lot of deaths and torture and other forms of difficulties for people in rural and urban areas in the heartland. But I think it reflects the fact that the military really doesn't know how to deal with this. And so what we see is a pattern of the military really losing control over many parts of the country, or only having partial control in these areas. On the other hand, there are some certain challenges for the movement that I think are important to highlight. One is the military's increasing use of air power, which they did not have that capability 20 years ago. And they have been able to purchase planes from both Russia and China. They've been able to get the training in Russia, for instance, and are now using those to great effect. So while their ground troops have been stretched thin and are really exhausted by what's going on, and if you read the news, you'll see the number of killings of soldiers in the Tatmadaw every day. And they also know at the grassroots level that they don't have the support of the majority of the public. So there's a morale problem as well. But the military does now have this Air Force capability that they didn't have before, and they are using it effectively. One of the things they're trying to do is to really attack those ethnic armed organizations, battalions, or even certain commanders who are involved in training the PDFs, the People Defense Forces, that are then operating often in the heartland or in other parts of the country. And so this is a tactic to try to divide the ethnic resistance organizations from the other armed forces that are operating, to create a gap between the ethnic armed groups and the Bama, primarily Bama resistance organization. So that's a real challenge, I think, going forward for the resistance movement. Another challenge is some of the old problems that remain, the authoritarian tendencies in the leadership of both civilian political parties, including the NLD, and in the ethnic armed resistance organizations. So the idea of trying to bring everybody together under one leader is really challenging because everybody's organization wants to be the leader of that alliance group and nobody wants to bow down to somebody else being their leader. So I think that, as Kuye was kind of indicating, having a looser type of network is probably the most realistic option at this point in time, and really over time trying to work toward more collaborative leadership styles would be important. A couple other points. I think there's still a need on the part of people from the Bama heartland, including people in the NLD, to understand ethnic grievances and aspirations more fully, and to be willing to share power more fully with people in the ethnic areas. And even though there was a peace process in the 2010s in which some of these issues were being discussed, the NLD actually completely stayed out of it during the USDP period. And in the NLD period, really didn't handle the process very well. They didn't understand the ethnic groups, the dynamics between the different groups, and how to treat the ethnic leaders in a way that would make them feel like they were being understood and respected. So that's clearly still a challenge. And the NLD also did not appoint chief ministers in the ethnic states who were members of ethnic political parties. Instead, they sometimes appointed people who were of that ethnic minority, but were NLD members and therefore under the control of the NLD leadership. And that really rubbed people wrong, particularly in Shan State and Rakhine State, but it was a lesson that was absorbed across all the ethnic groups. So building trust, as Kuye said, is extremely important. And I think that the democratic forces are going to have to work very hard to overcome the mistrust that is there, not just from historical times, but even very recent times in the 2010s, in order to be able to create a working relationship for the future, both militarily and politically. And my final comment is that I agree with Kuye that it's important to try to find principles that can bring the various resistance groups together. But I would add to that something that Scott Marcial, the former ambassador to Burma, proposed in an interview with the Irrawaddy News recently, which is that the resistance movement really should lay out a roadmap for where they're going. It doesn't have to be that specific, but I think what's important is that from outsiders' perspective who are not engaged daily in following this news, what they do see is these, kind of terrorist acts on all sides, right? Killings of people on all sides. So what's to say that the resistance is any better than what the military is doing? And so I think it's very important for the resistance movement to lay out a roadmap of where they're going and to communicate why their struggle and why they've taken the form of struggle they have and why that's justified in this circumstance, but also where they're going and that this is meant to lead to a peaceful resolution and stability in the country in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fink. This is really terrific. I think you elaboration on the force structure and how that affects the resistance movement, in terms of the leadership competition between the ethnic groups and the NUG, as well as the roadmap for the future of the resistance movement. They're really hitting the critical issues for the future of the movement. Because without answering these questions, people will be having questions as for where this is going and why is this future desirable and what kind of future does the movement really represent. I want to give the opportunity to Goye to respond to some of these comments. I think for people who observe I call it fragmentation of the resistance, or the fragmentation of the insurgency, that coming to the case of Myanmar is one thing that people will always refer to, and go, yeah, you did that as well, is this long-term historical grievances, this experience of Panlong agreement and ethnic groups feeling it did not work out in their favor, and this fundamental distrust of the Burma ethnic majority group. about whether they're going to fulfill their commitment or their promises when the war is won. So in my conversation with the EAOs, that came up repeatedly. Because we don't trust them. Why are we fighting for their cause? Why are we bleeding for them? And why should we listen to their command if we don't believe that they have our best interest in their heart? So we're just being used. So that's really a core question that I feel that is plaguing the future or the scenario of deeper cooperation between the EAOs and the Burma resistance. So would you care to comment that what are some of the ways to address this issue? Christina mentioned this collaborative leadership. Is that even considered? I also wonder what that looks like. Collaborative, because Myanmar is not the history and the culture, the collaborative aspect is not always the most prominent. So Go, yeah, I'd like to solicit your thoughts on these points, please. Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah. So I think that's so in the past the especially the ethnic armed groups, leaders of the ethnic armed groups, and also the some pro-democratic leaders from the Burma's mainstream politics discuss a lot about what's the future political arrangement for Burma. So, and also at first I know that they have a lot of agreements in the past. So, but these agreements are easily neglected, sometimes easily neglected and also forgotten, and they move forward to another step. So I think that's why I said the trust is really is one of the problems. So amongst the different groups especially currently involving in the current resistance movement. So that is why that's now the attempts to try to produce another common visions. So very recently they published the Federal Democratic Charter, and also now they are in the process of the drafting new transitional constitutions. So but I think that overemphasize on this kind of the detailed and inclusive documents that create setback and also create a political stalemate because that's I think it have to take time to discuss and to negotiate what the political future of the country. So in the current situation, that could create the opportunity for all resistance, for all groups, including the ethnic armed groups, so to fight against the military dictatorships deeply entrenched in the country for a long time. So that's why my prescriptions is that the pro-democratic forces and led by an NUG and also the ethnic armed groups. So they should increase their current military cooperation, and also they should create, the strategic coordinations, platforms, including the current, existing the C3C and the J2C and others current command structure. Through that, they have to negotiate and they have to pay trust. So amendments, and also they have to negotiate what is the political futures and what is the future political arrangement for Burma. So I think that without having any power on the ground and without having any concrete result on the battlefield, it's not realistic. So for this group to discuss the detailed political arrangements. So because that trust is an issue, another thing is that most of the EAOs they are very well established, that they are fighting against the military for a long time, that they have their own territories. So, and also the NUG and the PDF are newly founded groups. So that's why they have to consider why we have to trust them. So that's the first. And also without these groups don't have, consolidate control of territory. So what do we have to negotiate with them for the future's political arrangement. So that's why I think the most important thing is that these groups they have to. So now that's a promising point is that after the groups, most of the anti-Huanters resistant groups, including the EAOs, they came to the understanding that we have to uproot the military dictatorship in the country. And it could be the very good starting point for them to move forward. And also another promising point is that the current armed conflicts has been gaining momentum. They can, although they cannot gain and consolidate control over the territory, but that they can contest the military control, the Huanters' control of the territory, and also their fightings. We can see that their fighting and their relation have improved. So based on this situations and things that they should, in the current situations, instead of overemphasizing the detailed and inclusive political negotiation, they should focus to increase the military cooperation. In the next step, they should build a very strong, comprehensive military command structure. That's really important, I think.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing your thought. It's definitely not an easy problem to solve. It has plagued the country for decades, if not centuries. So I'm going to go into some of the questions from the audience, and I have to say these are well-informed questions. The first one is for Goye. It's focused again on the fragmentation of the resistance movement. What are some of the, for example, the practical competition among the resistance or different factions of the resistance? And Vanda is asking about from Brookings is asking about the competition over local resources, assuming that the PDF and EAOs, they collect tolls, they collect taxation. So does that create competition among the groups themselves? And also related to that, there's a question about the how the movement, and this question is from the Liberation Daily newspaper of France, is about the weapons of the resistance movement. Christina mentioned that NUG has done pretty good fundraising to support the movement to go forward. Where did they get their money? How is the money being spent? What do they need down the road? So if I could pose these two questions to you separately. Goye, would you like to give the first question a try? Just basic internal competition within the resistance because of the competitive needs.
Yes. So in my perspective, that's the current resistance movements that started with the very decentralized fightings as the emergence across the country. So after 1.5 years, the NUG is trying to control or set up a command system that covers these disparate the units across the country. So in the current situation, I see the growing cooperations among the resistant groups. We have not seen any significant competitions in most of the armed groups. So, but the key problem in my perspective is the trust, a lack of trust amongst the resistant groups. I think so through negotiation with the different groups, the NUG and EAOs, they can gradually control and command the plethora of the armed groups across the country. So far, I have not seen any competition over tax and also collection of tests, and also we see some disagreements over the future arrangement of the country, but they are still negotiation. So sometimes the stalemate in the negotiation and can create a setback, but they're trying to overcome it. I have not seen any significant competition over the or future arrangement of the country. I think the most significant threat is the lack of tracks. So they have to overcome it. So through paid interest and negotiation.
Okay. Well, thank you. I do have some follow-up questions on that, but I want to hear Christina's answer on the weaponries question first. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So the resistance organizations, both the ethnic armed organizations and the People's Defense Forces, are getting their weapons in a number of ways. There are weapons that are coming in across borders, particularly from China and Thailand through various means. These aren't official transfers, but different groups have ways of procuring weapons in those countries. There are also a lot of weapons manufacturing going on among different ethnic armed organizations, particularly up in northern Myanmar, but in other parts of the country as well. There are distributions of weapons between different ethnic armed organizations, as well as from ethnic armed organizations to PDFs. Sometimes those are purchased by one group from another group. But anyway, there are distribution channels between the different ethnic armed groups across the country. And then also groups are, as I said, sometimes making their own kind of crude weapons, even if they can't make more sophisticated weapons. And finally, in some cases, armed groups are also capturing weapons from the Tatmadaw or the government military. Sometimes there are also deserters who are handing over ammunition or weapons to the armed resistance groups. So those are the various ways in which they are getting weapons. It's really a hodgepodge, and some of the groups are much better armed than others, particularly in northern Myanmar, where they have had access to more sophisticated weapons from China and also have their own higher quality production facilities. I did want to answer John Brandon's question about why people don't like the name Tatmadaw anymore. And that is because the Da in Tatmadaw means royal or honorable. So it comes from the old days of, the kings and the palace. Da was kind of an honorific that was attached to words to say that it was something royal. And so people feel that that's not an appropriate term for the military, and that is basically kind of a rogue armed force that is acting like marauders in its own country, and therefore shouldn't be dignified with the title Da.
So do they have a new term for Tatmadaw?
So people are just saying Tat, which means armed force, or Sit Tat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that's very significant. There are a couple of questions about Tatmadaw, is basically the rise and fall of Tatmadaw, where their power really stand. And I like to pose these questions to both of you. One question is about who are the allies of Tatmadaw, and what are the opportunities to weaken these alliances? And I'm thinking not just externally, but also internally, because although we talked about EAOs, we have not mentioned that there is still a pretty large grouping of EAOs that are sitting on the wall, that are still negotiating with Tatmadaw about, they're still talking about ceasefire, talking about the political future, and that's led by the UWSA. And supposedly UWSA have their own weapons making factories, and they're also supplying some of the EAOs and the PDFs. So that definitely raises an interesting question of the political landscape, and where do you think that these other northern Shan state groups really stand? And following on that is the NUG and the resistance would like to say that the military is losing territory, they're losing morale, and they're being weakened by the day. But we're still looking at a prolonged, ongoing stalemate in terms of battlefield development. So where is this? Is a resistance winning, or is gaining ground but not significant enough to call it a victory just yet? So how do we judge these outcomes from the battlefield? So whoever has some thoughts to share.
Yeah, regarding the alliance of the militaries, I think that especially when we look at the EAOs in the countries, I saw as so three groups, three main groups so of the EAOs. The first group is that the very well established and long-standing EAOs. So which is which is aligned with the resistant forces such as the KNU and KIA. So another groups is that the small EAOs, so which is gradually aligned with the military, and also they frequently met the winter, and also their discussions the ceasefires. Most of them have signed ceasefire in 2015. So we can see the members or some members or many members of the PPST said so who signed ceasefire with the militaries gradually aligned with the winter. So that's most of them are the small groups. So another groups is that the neutral ones. So and also very strong as ones, including the UWSA. So they have not committed to any they have not take side with the so NUG and also the winter. So they are hedging their bets, so waiting for the who can prevail. So in this movement, so but at first I know that they have reached out to the resistant groups, while at the same time that they are frequently meeting with the winter. So I think that this third group is the strongest groups. So I think that's the energies that they, and also the resistant forces, that they should try to convince these third groups so to join side with the resistant movements. I think it's really important. If so, that the energy can demonstrate, the resistant forces can demonstrate such kind of the unities, including so from these groups, I think it will be the fatal blow to the military.
Great answer. Christina, what do you think?
Sure. Let me just talk about a couple of other groups of allies. So inside the country, there are also civilian politicians who have agreed to work with the military regime and who are planning to run in the election. In many cases, these are people who used to be part of the NLD, but for one reason or another became disenchanted with the NLD leadership, or had some kind of personal bad experience with somebody in the NLD leadership and kind of left the NLD party. And those parties, some of whom ran in the 2020 election, and then there's some individuals who were still in the NLD but have since kind of taken a different approach, I would say. Some of them, do plan to run in the election. And so the military regime, I think, and this is something different from the past as well. If we look at the military junta's kind of governing council in the past, in the 1980s and 90s, early 2000s, they did not have civilians from other ethnic, parties or, Burmans who had originally come from democratic parties who were part of their cabinets. And it's not that these people have a lot of power in the cabinet today, but they are represented there. And that's something that the regime has tried to use to say, hey, we are an inclusive government. So that's one group of people who I think the resistance forces feel very unhappy with. At the same time, there are international allies. And one that's, I think, particularly surprising maybe is India. India has been supportive of the regime and not very welcoming of people from the resistance movement, except for in the state of Mizoram. And that was a decision by the local government in Mizoram, which borders on Western Myanmar, where there has been a very welcoming atmosphere. But otherwise, the policy of the Indian government has been pro-military, and that's really because of their own economic interests in Myanmar and the fact that they feel like they're in competition with China for economic access to the country. So along with India, we can see that China has taken a position that's been somewhat supportive of the regime, though not completely. So, often kind of China has taken a position where it's hedging its bets, and we see that here as well. In some ways, at the UN, for instance, allowing Jia Mo-tun, the NLD representative, to continue to be the representative at the UN, but at the same time, in many ways, kind of showing its support for the regime. So a mixed picture there. And then within ASEAN, there are some countries with, authoritarian governments who have felt at least more less willing to criticize the regime. And then on the other hand, we see some of the other governments in ASEAN which have been much more critical.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. Just on China, I think the reason that I have been given that China continues to support Ambassador Jia Mo-tun's seat at UN is because history credential or his legitimacy originates from the last legitimately elected government of Myanmar. So, but at the same time, like you said, they have also hosted the foreign minister of the military government in China, and as a formal as a formal invitation, a formal meeting between the two foreign ministers. So there's definitely a little bit of a hedging and balancing diplomacy here. We have 4 minutes left, and I know Lex Rifle raised a question about Rakhine, which is extremely important for the future of the country. And we're trying to have a separate session to focus on Rakhine down the road. So Lex, please stay tuned on that. I want to bring the attention to one question that I find highly controversial, which is how much territory does the military still control? Which I've seen figure as low as 17% and as high as 60%. But I guess the distinction is also the percentage of territory does not equate to the percentage of population. So if they control the population centers, even if they don't control the vast rural or the ethnic areas, in terms of the elections, they could still possibly have a significant a critical mass of the population to be forced to vote in the upcoming election. Just want to pose that question and hear your thoughts. What do you think about the military's control of the territory, of the people, and of the country?
Yeah, I think that's in the conflict periods, it's really difficult to say how much control the military and also how much control the resistance force have gained. So, but so far, at first I know that the military is losing ground. So losing ground means that they are losing consolidated control over territory. So in those areas, I said it's a contested areas. So far as I know, the resistance forces have contested over 50% of the territory across the country. It doesn't mean that it can gain the consolidated control over this territory, because that's especially due to the superior in air power and heavy artillery. The military try to attack this area, but although they lose the consolidated control over this country. So I think it is safe to say that the military is losing consolidated control over 50% of territory across the country, which is another serious contestation by the resistance forces.
Great. Thank you. Christina, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the election and whether the regime can actually hold the election. Right now, during this month, the regime is trying to do the voter list. So what they're doing is they're having local officials go house to house and find out who's there and how old they are and register them, basically create the voter list. And what's happening is that resistance forces are trying to disrupt that in every way they can, and including using violence against those who are administering this and the offices that they operate out of. So I think that it's going to be challenging in many ways for the regime to hold the election, but one of them is even just whether they can actually put together a somewhat accurate voter list given the disruption that's happening.
Great answer, great answer. And I particularly like the distinction that Go-Ye made between the contested control and the consolidated control. So the military is losing territory where they have consolidated control, but it does not necessarily mean the resistance gaining consolidated control, which is much more firm and confirmed control. So that's I guess that's really comes back to the definition of a stalemate that we're looking at, a tug of war. Well, we are at 10 o'clock at the end of the hour. I want to take the opportunity to really thank Go-Ye and thank Professor Fink for joining us today and sharing your thoughts, which are so insightful. One thing that we're trying to do is to keep the discussion about Myanmar, about the development in the country going, and make it available to the people and to the policy community that still cares about the country. And this country deserves a lot of attention and resources as much as we can spare. So I hope that I will be able to invite both of you back in the future just to join other discussions. And hopefully our audience will stay tuned for our future events related to the development in Myanmar. Again, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Thank you for joining us. I wish that you have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Have a